It is Wednesday, my dudes, which means it is time for another First Thoughts and Initial Impressions video. This one will be on Sharun, the newest Soul Weaver that was just shown today. She appears to be a debuffer slash tank buster style of character. As with all of these kind of videos, I'll be giving you my 2 cents on what I think about the character, and trust me, I do want you to know what I think about the character this time because I really hope I'm wrong about this character and my opinions on them. I would love for this video to age like sour milk. That is for sure. And I'll also talk about, specific artifacts that I think might be good on her, as well as some build paths. So as always, again, just sit back, listen to the sound of my voice, and let me talk about my 2 cents. But not before, as always, we watch the S3 introduction.
Identifying which signs lead to the proper future, and providing guidance accordingly. That is my duty. Gather round, sweet children. It's time to sate your hunger. The proper future. It appears ever more clearly in my mind.
Alright, so Sharun in the English dub of Epic 7 is voiced by Xanthi Huynh, who you can hear as Haru from Persona 5, as well as Ophelia from the absolutely wonderful Vivi Fluorite Eyes song. Hopefully I pronounced her name correctly. Taking a look at her stats, we can see that she is an Earth Soul Weaver of the Virgo zodiac symbol. She shares the same stats as Maid Chloe. She has 640 attack, which is absolutely terrible for a character, especially a 5-star in Epic 7. 5,340 health, which is low when compared to most other 5-stars in Epic 7, but is, I guess, alright for a Soul Weaver. 106 speed, which is good for a Soul Weaver, but is still below average compared to other characters in Epic 7. 720 defense, which is very high for a character. It is pretty much one of the best defensive scores across the entire roster. 15% critical hit chance, 150% critical hit damage, 5% dual attack chance, and a starting effectiveness of 18%. She has no effect resistance. Imprint release is health for the upper and frontmost sides. It is going to be 12.9% health, and then the imprint concentration is 27% effectiveness, which is pretty good for a character that is trying to land debuffs. So yeah, if you're going to want to play this character, you probably want to pick up a couple of copies to be able to get that imprint concentration. And having a 45% starting effectiveness is a pretty good spot. So, yeah, you can tell based on this that she probably has some form of debuff in her kit. Maid Chloe has a stun in her kit, which is why she has the starting effectiveness, but it's not a stat that we're particularly going to be building. Sharun, however, seems to be a character that you will be building some amount of effectiveness on. Otherwise, I think the character will probably end up falling flat, and you'll see what I'm talking about when we go over the rest of the skills. So first, let's talk about her S2 passive, Just Trust Me. At the end of an enemy's turn, for each buff granted to an enemy, Sharun has a 5% chance to increase their combat readiness by 20%. So for example, if they have 10 buffs total on the enemy team, that is going to be a 50% chance to increase your combat readiness by 20%. That is not once per turn, so you can proc that at the end of every single turn. On top of that, at the end of the turn, she will grant a random buff and a barrier to the ally on your team, except for herself, if they have the highest amount of attack. That's basically saying that if Sharun is the only character left on your team, she cannot give the buff and the barrier to herself. Barrier strength increases proportional to Sharun's max health. The random buff that you can get is increased attack, increased critical hit chance, increased critical hit damage, and continuous healing. Increased attack and increased critical hit damage are obviously the all-stars here. You really want those, especially since they're always going to go to your best damage dealer. The critical hit chance, not really super good, because most damage dealers, at least the highest attack ones, are probably built with 100% critical hit chance, and if they're not built with that much, it's very, very close, or they're a character like Hua Young who doesn't need critical hit chance to begin with, so that's pretty much a dud. Continuous healing can also be a dud depending on where we are in the game. Obviously, if your highest attack character is at full health, that doesn't really do anything. So that one's kind of going to be hit or miss based on the flow of battle. You basically have a 50-50 shot of actually getting a really, really good buff here, though. My biggest problem, I think, with this is that the percentage chance to get the combat readiness push, even though it doesn't proc once per turn, you can get it multiple times, simply isn't really high enough to justify what it actually is. So let me explain. So this has half the rate of gain as Chief is on the scene, which is Landy's S2, right? So Landy gets 10% fighting spirit per buff as opposed to this 5% chance to proc. Yes, obviously it's not quite the same, but when you actually proc the Chief is on the scene at 100% and you get the full burst reset with the defense penetration, that payoff pretty much wins you the game. Now, I understand that this is not going to be a damage dealer and it's not trying to win the game, but you have to understand that, like, if I'm going to be picking a hero to punish buffs, they really need to punish buffs. Getting an extra 20% combat readiness, to me at least, doesn't feel like it's super punishing. Like, if it procs 3 times, that's 60% CR. That is, ever so slightly better than if, like, Designer Lilibet popped up to the front to punish a debuff team. So I don't really feel like it's that punishing compared to what Landy gives you, which is the other character that I'm going to naturally compare it to, because Landy is designed to punish teams that play a lot of buffs. So that portion of the passive doesn't feel really good to me, even in the best case scenario. Because if they only have like 4 buffs on the team, that's 20%. That's not too much higher than 15% resistance, which doesn't happen all that often in Epic 7. It does happen, but not all that often. So I feel like there's just going to be games where Just Trust Me doesn't actually proc anything of value. Like, you just never proc the combat readiness push. The character is a 106 speed-based character, so they're not exactly going to be the fastest, right? And there are going to be times where you're just going to proc only critical hit chance and continuous healing on the character. And that also doesn't feel really good. So my initial impression is just this passive has a lot of RNG baked into it where it could just do nothing. And then also the buffs that she can get cannot actually be applied to herself. So when, like, push comes to shove, if she's like getting focus fired, then she might not actually be able to give herself the barrier to save herself. She's really going to be relying on that 720 base defense to do a lot of the heavy lifting in order to make sure she doesn't get picked off right away. And we'll come back around and talk more about this in a little bit. Instead, let's move on now and talk about her S3, which is May You Perish. You acquire 3 souls upon use, and it has a 4 to 5 turn cooldown depending on Molagora. It is an AoE attack that decreases buff durations by 1 turn before inflicting decreased speed and venom for 2 turns. It then increases the combat readiness of Sharun by 50%. Venom says at the start of the turn, receives damage equivalent to 10% of your max health, and it is inflicted with injuries proportional to the damage suffered. Venom effect applies to heroes only. This is basically their way of saying Sharun only really does something in PvP. They don't want you to be able to use this for Abyss, for example. Venom is essentially like 2 stacks of poison. Would be, so it might be pretty good in Abyss if you could actually use it there and you could stack it up, which I wouldn't be like super opposed to, but I feel like they would just try to have mechanics in the Abyss floors to try and circumvent that, because they don't want another like Abyss all-star, I guess. But yeah, it's essentially like 2 stacks of poison, and the damage it dealt is dealt as injury. So that's what it does. It's meant to, again, reinforce that she's probably more of a tank buster style Soul Weaver, because you're punishing people that have a lot of buffs on their team, and usually teams that are playing a lot of buffs with your DNs, your Razes, things like that. They're very tanky teams. They're trying to grind out the game. So she's designed to punish those kinds of characters, those kinds of team compositions. My problem with the character, actually, though, comes from this skill itself. So Mediator Queric and Designer Lilibet hose almost every single debuffer in the current metagame, unless they're built really, really fast like Ran or Peyra or Solitaria of the Snow, or they have some kind of innate protection, again, like Solitaria of the Snow. Characters like Ran and Peyra can end games before somebody like Mediator Queric ever gets off his cleanse. If you're playing against a designer Lilibet, you can pivot to something like a Summertime Mysteria or like a Pirate Captain Flancleave, because those get around designer Lilibet. Solitaria of the Snow, again, has stealth to protect herself, and she also has a built-in strip on her S1 as opposed to Sharun, who has it on the S3, so we're going to have to wait. So if they throw up like Hand Guy S3, for example, May You Perish literally has no value at all until, you know, we've gone one more whole cycle around the entire enemy team, and that's going to obviously also apply to her S1 when we talk about that in a second. So yeah, Sharun just doesn't have the speed to be the kind of like debuffer that we see that's already really good. She doesn't have the kind of protection that we traditionally see in a debuffer to be very, very good. Even against the tanky team like she's designed to be played against, like where they usually are playing somebody like DN, which generates a whole host of buffs, right? DN still has a 2 debuff cleanse in her kit on a very short cooldown, and she's probably going to cycle turns a lot faster than Sharun as well. So, you know, one of the primary characters that you are designed to counter can also counter you, so that's also never a really, really good thing. So already I don't really like the character. If it's not obvious, I don't really think she does enough to justify rolling for her and putting resources into her. But again, I hope that the video ages like sour milk, and I am very, very wrong. The one thing I do really like, though, is the S1. The S1 is How Fragile. Attacks the enemy with a 65 to 75% chance, depending on Malagora, to inflict venom for 1 turn. After attacking, when the target is inflicted with venom, increases the skill cooldowns by 1 turn. Obviously, we know what venom does from previously. And the S1 is also the soul burn for 10 souls. It increases the effect chance of proccing venom to 100% and inflicts venom for 2 turns as opposed to 1. So this move, to me, again, seems really, really good. If you've ever played Designer Lilibet or Judge Kisei or Blue Kisei, you already know how good it is to just push back skill cooldowns by a turn. Even if it's only just 1 turn, that can be enough to buy you time. This is a way to push back skill cooldowns on the S1. I really, really like that. You can keep certain characters off of their S3s, their S2s, for example, that DN example. You might be able to, with high enough effectiveness, just keep her off her barrier so that she never is actually able to cleanse any of the venom debuffs or the slow debuff from the S3. That's pretty cool. I do like that. Also, How Fragile, this S1 seems really, really good on counter set. If you can imagine like proccing like 2 or 3 of these in a turn cycle, seems really, really good, and it lends itself, the counter set, naturally to that S2 passive. If I was personally going to build the character, I think I would go counter set with like a hit offset to, you know, get the extra effectiveness. That's how I personally would build her. And the S1, again, feels like the best part of the kit, but overall I'm still not like super enthusiastic about it, because even if you push back the skill cooldowns on somebody like Apocalypse Ravi, I don't really think that's going to pan out for you, because if she's on Crimson Seed, obviously she can get past the Venom, and you're not really going to get any value there. Like, you might be able to push the skill cooldowns back, but you're not actually inflicting injury or any real damage to the character. And most likely, this character is going to end up getting focused, because they don't want the rest of your team to keep receiving those critical hit damage buffs, those attack buffs, and obviously you accrue value with this character the longer she's on the board. So I think most people are going to hyper-focus her, assuming there's not something more pressing like, say, a Hua Yang that has to go first. Remember, S2 passive doesn't really provide any protection, so like I was saying before, that 720 defense, which, you know, was recently buffed, that has to do a lot of heavy lifting for this character. So if we compare her to Maid Chloe, who's the character who has very similar stats, the same exact stat pool, I should say, Maid Chloe usually maxes out speed-wise around 250 to maybe the low 260s at the highest levels of play. Not enough to, again, take the first turn for a debuffer, which is already pretty bad. In fact, that's never going to be fast enough to outspeed even, like, average Solitaria of the Snows. I personally have, like, a high 260-ish speed Solitaria, and that is considered low as far as Solitarias go. When we take a look at her HP, if you go HP neck and HP ring, you're looking at somewhere around the low 20k range for health, but you're foregoing all of the effect resistance that you would need to resist potential debuffs, and also all of the effectiveness that you need to actually land your debuffs. So I probably wouldn't play effect resistance, but again, I do want to harp on the fact that you're not fast enough to not get like provoke locked by Conqueror Lilius, for example, or get stunned by Para. So if you wanted to mitigate that, you're obviously losing health. If you want to ensure that you're actually landing Venom, that is again also going to cut into that health pool. So if we take a look at like an average made Chloe that plays an effect resistance ring, which has, you know, similar health numbers, similar health capabilities to an effectiveness ring, you're going to look at like maybe 16 to 17k HP on average on the character with like 1500 defense. And the very best made Chloe's, the ones that are like insane that you see in like High Emperor and Legend, like I have seen them have like maybe like 1650, 1700 defense, maybe like 18k HP at the very best. So that's like where we're really looking for as far as like the absolute limit of where we're pushing this character, like 250s in the speed ranges, maybe like 1700 defense, 18k HP. So yeah, not fast enough for turn one, no real mitigation, you're just relying on raw bulk stats. So you also have cleansers that are really just rough for her in general to do her job. So I just don't see it. Like all the RNG, all the potential counters, the fact that you have to dedicate a lot of gear, the fact that even if you have the best gear, it's still not, I think, up to the task. And then the final cherry on top of why I don't think I personally am going to roll is because Summer Charlotte was announced to be next week, and she's a limited unit. And, you know, Sharun here, you can get her at any time. So for me, this is going to be a hard pass. If I'm wrong, if I miss something, then let me know down in the comments. I usually don't like to, you know, rag on a unit as hard as I am on this one, but this one's pretty disappointing. Like, even Yulha, who has turned out to be just okay, I was pretty positive about that one. Even, you know, Arya, which kind of, you know, fell in line with exactly where I thought she would be, where like only a very small subset of people would actually be able to bring her out. Otherwise, she would just get hosed and not really be usable by most players. That also kind of panned out. This character to me feels like Teiyu levels of not good. And I hope that's not the case, because that would mean that this character would basically just be DOA and would need buffs immediately. The last thing that we do have to talk about here, though, in the video is going to be her artifact, which is Sacred Tree Branch. It increases her effectiveness by 15 to 30% depending on the level of the artifact. After using a basic skill, it increases the combat readiness of an ally except for the caster with the highest attack by 10%. This artifact skill can only apply to one hero within a team, I guess to prevent you from just playing like counterset Destina and counterset Sharun and counterset Maid Chloe and like a bunch of Soul Weavers and just have tons and tons and tons of turns. So I guess that's why they did it. I don't really see any other Soul Weaver artifacts you'd actually want to play on Sharun over this one, instead of like maybe Flawless Garments might be pretty good because it gives more effectiveness in the long run, but I think I'd still rather have the combat readiness push. Maybe Idol's Cheer if you think she's going to get focused a lot. Really lean into making sure that the person that you're buffing with the highest attack is actually going to get their turns in a timely fashion. The artifact, though, really does scream play me on a counter build, because if you get a bunch of counters, you're going to get a bunch of CR. So, again, counter set to me seems like the way to go. Proof of Valor also could be something pretty good if you actually achieve those really high bulk stats that we talked about and you want to keep her on the board for a really long time, then maybe that's something that might work out. But I personally probably still wouldn't play it. There's just too many high-profile characters right now that want Proof of Valor, and it doesn't stack if you have two on a team. Characters like Rimuru, Apocalypse, Robbie, and even like Lionheart Ceremia really want Proof of Valor in this current meta. So, yeah. Regardless, though, Sacred Tree Branch here, this artifact, I don't think it's really worth grabbing for any other Soul Weavers other than Sharun at this point. So if you want to play Sharun, and you're pretty keen on playing that counter set build that I'm talking about, then for sure definitely try and pick up a copy or two of this one, just to really smooth over the gameplay for the most part. So that's going to be it for pretty much this first thoughts and initial impressions. Sorry I'm kind of a downer on this character, especially if you really like this character. I think for the vast majority of you watching this video, it's probably a lot smarter to hold your bookmarks and wait until we either see a data mine for Charlotte or we see the preview for Charlotte, because it's not like once you know what Charlotte does, you won't be able to come back and get Sharun. Sharun will still be available after Charlotte comes out. So to me, this just feels like a skip for right now and table back after you've acquired Charlotte, or if Charlotte just for some reason is an absolute dumpster fire and terrible. But even then, I still wouldn't recommend it, because if you remember Landy, for example, like that character was limited, was awful at release. People skipped it, and then they buffed it when she was like no longer available and became the meta. So yeah, I still again think I would just grab Charlotte. So let me know down in the comments below your thoughts on the character as well. Tune in tomorrow when I release a how to gear characters video for newer players. I've been working on this thing for like 2+ weeks at this point. It's probably my longest video to date and my most in-depth video. So if you are a newer player, or you just are having trouble with the gearing system in Epic 7, I'm going to go through almost everything and break it down real simple to really help you smooth out your progression as a player in Epic 7. So please look forward to that. And I believe we also have a balance adjustment preview to talk about on Friday as well. So if that's the case, then look forward to that. Otherwise, I will just do a standard giveaway announcement video on Friday. So again, look forward to that. As always, enjoy the rest of your day, the rest of your week, and I'll catch you all in the next one. Bye-bye now.